We've got some very interesting news to take a look at here today as the New York Rangers reportedly made an official trade offer for one of Buffalo Sabres' young potential stars at this trade deadline, as there were quite a few kind of talks and reports coming out around this specific player that he may be traded at the deadline there. So we're going to take a look at what the kind of rumor was around the Rangers being interested in that player and kind of the potential package that was offered. So now let's get right into it here and take a look at trade news involving the New York Rangers, Buffalo Sabres, and JJ Peterka, the potential German hockey star, as he has been quite the phenomenal player this season for the Sabres. He's nearly at a point per game, and for a guy who is still only 23 years old, turned 23 not too long ago, and is playing on truly one of the worst franchises in all of the NHL, if not over the last decade, pretty much the worst, you could definitely say. So I think with how bad they've been, and you take a look at how good JJ has been, I think he's obviously a guy with a ton of potential and definitely could end up being a true star caliber player one day in the NHL. And right now he's playing honestly quite phenomenal, especially when you do consider how bad of a team Buffalo has been for so long. And earlier on this season, there were quite a few reports that kind of came out in some rumors kind of talking about the Buffalo Sabres wanting to go out there and make a big splash trade happen to obviously try and shake up their roster and get them on track towards potentially making the playoffs. Obviously, they're not going to do it this season. Their franchise is definitely not in a great spot. But they wanted to make a splash trade, and that made sense. They wanted to shake things up and try and make something happen there to kind of, spark something in the team, I guess. And eventually, they did make a pretty big trade happen around the trade deadline there, shipping off Dylan Cousins over to the Ottawa Senators. And so far, I would definitely say Ottawa is looking like the winners in that deal. I initially thought that Ottawa was the winners, and I think going forward, they're going to be as well. So maybe not the best trade there, long-term wise, especially for the Buffalo Sabres. We'll see how it turns out, but they obviously wanted to make a big trade happen there. They ended up making a fairly big trade happen. Obviously, I don't think it was a great one for them, but they made that trade happen. And, really and truly, when we were hearing those rumors about JJ Peterka, in my opinion, it made no sense. I mean, whether or not they are 100% true and Buffalo, was potentially really close to possibly making that trade happen with the Rangers potentially, and we'll take a look at some kind of quotes here in a second, but to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense why they'd be looking to shop a guy like JJ. I think he is the exact kind of player you want to have on your team for a very, very long time. You want to have him around for the next decade plus, being a great top six winger for you. He's right now at 51 points in 61 games played on a awful, awful Buffalo Sabres team. He turned 23 in January, so he's still very young. He has a lot of room to grow in his game, and for a guy who's already almost at a point per game, he's taken a fairly decent size step up from last season there where he had a total of 50 points. He's already got 51 this season, only 61 games played. So this is a guy who has taken a pretty big step up from last season there. He's a guy with a lot of potential, a lot of talent, and I really kind of wonder why they'd be looking to trade away a guy like that. There were some kind of question marks about Dylan Cousins, maybe effort level in games at moments like that with the Buffalo Sabres, and obviously them being a terrible franchise isn't going to help with, a lot of guys kind of effort levels and them really not having a chance at all to make playoffs pretty much year after year. So eventually those kind of young guys who have been there for quite some time now and who haven't been able to take that big step, it can happen with guys like that who maybe they're not showing 100% effort, obviously, like maybe Dylan wasn't. And there were some clips where maybe he wasn't taking up for teammates and all that kind of stuff there, but there's other factors going into that. I'm not blaming Dylan Cousins at all because that franchise is just not run right. They're not doing a good job there at all. I mean, I'm not saying I could do a better job and fix it, but I'm just saying the Buffalo Sabres are obviously terrible. So you're going to have some guys who get a little unhappy with all that losing constantly. And you're going to see guys who maybe, don't put in 100% effort at moments. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what happens there with these pro athletes there. They don't win. And when you're on that team for such a long time there, and such a bad team as well, when you really, like I said, have no chance at making the playoffs there, you're going to see stuff like that. So maybe trading away Dylan Cousins made sense there. And I don't think it's going to be the best thing long-term for them, but maybe it did make sense at this moment to do it possibly. But really and truly, a guy like JJ Peterka, to me, it makes absolutely no sense unless they were going to be getting back like a pretty major haul and a really great return. That's the only way I'd be thinking on even possibly trading away a guy like JJ. If I was the Buffalo Sabres, if I was Kevin Adams, the Buffalo Sabres GM, that's the only way I'd possibly even think about trading away JJ is if another team was offering way more than I expected. That's the only possible way you're pulling a trigger on a deal like that with a guy like JJ in it, because the Buffalo Sabres are so bad and you need to have guys like this who can produce. And this is a guy who is a great offensive threat. And with him only being 23 and already taking quite a few steps in his game, you take a look at what he did in his past seasons, he's pretty much taken a pretty decent sized step up in his game, at least points wise, every single season. Back in 2021, 2022, had 2 games played there, so not going to count that season, but his real kind of first full season in the NHL had 77 games played, 32 points, then goes to 82 games played, 50 points, and then now as a 23-year-old who turned 23 in January, so, about like halfway through the season about that, now he's got 61 games played, 51 points. So he's got 21 less games played and has one more point than last season. Each season so far, he has taken a pretty big step up offensively. He's obviously a guy who is improving quite a bit. And with his age and with his talent and potential, to me, it never made any sense for the Buffalo Sabres to even really consider trading away a guy like JJ. But let's take a look here at the news from the Hockey News article and from Frank Seravalli as well, as he was kind of main insider on this news. But they end up saying the New York Rangers were reportedly closer to acquiring JJ Peterka from the Buffalo Sabres than many people may actually realize. There were rumblings that the Rangers had an interest in Peterka, but those rumors ultimately quieted down in the hours leading up to the NHL trade deadline. Then they go on to say, according to NHL insider Frank Seravalli, not only did the Rangers talk to Buffalo's brass, being Kevin Adams, I'm sure the general manager, about the potential of acquiring Peterka, but they had a massive offer on the table. Quote, I know that the Rangers were one of 2 or 3 teams to put a bona fide, legitimate offer on the table for Peterka. I think they offered up a roster player and a first-round pick. I don't know who the roster player was, Seravalli said. And it also was reported that they don't exactly kind of know, why this deal ended up falling through. But like I said, the only way I would even have personally thought of trading a guy like Peterka if I was the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres is if there was an offer on the table that was absolutely insane. It would have had to have been a very big offer for a guy like Peterka because, like I said, I truly do think he could be a possible star. You take a look at how he plays, the way he plays, what he's done so far this season in the NHL, and kind of how he's gotten better each season so far. This guy has a lot of potential. So, to me, if you're running the Buffalo Sabres, why you'd be looking to trade away a guy like that, I'm not exactly sure, but maybe the Rangers were offering something like Chris Kreider plus a first, and that very well would have likely been declined. And then the other player that I think could have possibly been offered up was maybe Alexis Lafreniere, but I'm not exactly sure whether or not Chris Drury would have been willing to do that. I mean, I have no idea, how much the Rangers and Chris Drury mainly kind of do value a guy like Alexis Lafreniere. Obviously, they signed him to that big extension, but if you were able to get a guy like JJ Peterka back, that is the kind of move where you are kind of more willing to give up a guy like Alexis Lafreniere. And I know there's been a lot of talk about his contract not being great and him not taking another step forward in his game, and people are really worried about that contract already. I'm definitely not quite there yet. Am I disappointed with how he's played so far this season? Absolutely. But there are quite a few players that I would say the exact same thing about, being disappointed with how they played so far this season on the Rangers. So I'm not completely worried about this deal quite yet. If he has, next season being another kind of step back, let's say, from this one even, kind of like he did from last season to this one, then maybe I'll start to get a little worried here. But right now, really and truly, he's still quite young. Obviously, still only being 23 years old, does not turn 24 until October. Like I said, there's been a lot of players on this team who haven't quite performed up to expectations. So really and truly, I am not worried about this Lafreniere deal. But if you were able to get back a guy like JJ Peterka and only have to give up first on top of that, it might not be the worst thing to do. I'm not exactly sure whether or not Chris Drury would even entertain that. I have no idea how much a guy like Chris Drury would value a guy like Alexis Lafreniere compared to JJ Peterka. But really and truly, those are the kind of deals where it only makes sense to trade away a guy like Lafreniere, where you're really getting back a great player / an upgrade potentially. And right now, I would definitely say a guy like JJ Peterka is for sure better than Alexis Lafreniere. So maybe the offer was Chris Kreider in a first. Maybe it was Lafreniere in a first. We have no idea. But at the end of the day, I am still hopeful Lafreniere can get back on track. I hope Chris Kreider does eventually get that move. I think with where things are going with this franchise, it's time to kind of move on potentially, especially with all these great prospects coming up. So hopefully we see some more moves happen with the Rangers. Adding in a guy like JJ Peterka would obviously be a phenomenal addition, but personally, I just don't see specifically JJ Peterka getting a move from the Sabres at any time soon here unless something crazy does happen, because he is truly a potential star in this league and very well could end up being one of the top players on the Buffalo Sabres for the next decade plus, and maybe get them back to the playoffs for the first time in quite a long time. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. If you have enjoyed it, definitely don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post every single day a video about the New York Rangers at 9 a.m. As well as don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts on the New York Rangers as a whole and their playoff push here, as there's a pretty big game later on tonight against the Blue Jackets, as well as the news about JJ Peterka and the kind of rumored or reported kind of trade offer that New York Rangers sent to the Sabres being a first-round pick plus a roster player. Who do you think that player was? You think it was Lafreniere, Kreider, someone else? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.